Disclosure: I was invited by the Panzermuseum Munster in 2019. So there was a lot of talk about the decade-old T-62s that Russia has moved to the front lines in summer, and more recently about a visit to a factory where T-62s were upgraded or at least made combat ready again. Yet a question that came up for me lately was, what about all those T-80s? Because there should be a lot of those still around. According to a source, there should be 3,000 of these in storage, and the T-80 is one of the most capable tanks in the Russian arsenal. At first it seems clearly far better than the T-62 or even the T-72. So why are T-80s not restored? Or are they? First off, we don't really know if T-80s are currently restored as well. Likely they are, more a bit later. Yet a lot of people were talking about T-62s being restored. Since in October 2022, Russia announced that it would modernize 800 T-62s. Furthermore, a video was shown as well from a repair plant. This was of course something the TikTok war reported on, and we all know seeing is believing, but believing is not necessarily knowing. What we know is that already in 2021 Omsk Transmash started a project to modernize 400 T-80s. The question is if they were modernizing active ones or those in storage, and due to the war, if this project might have been switched to repairing, restoring tanks or something else. As such, it is very likely that T-80s are being restored among other tanks as well. Additionally, in September 2022 a decree was signed to open tank repair plants with 365 and 227 employees respectively. It is hard to tell if these will be for T-80s, but it is without question that Russia is restoring tanks. Yet there are some good reasons why the number of T-80s likely will be rather low, so let us look at those. One very important aspect of the T-80 is that it is a very resource-intensive tank. This is mainly due to its gas turbine engine. They are very expensive. To give you some numbers, nevertheless there was continuing interest in the Soviet army to replace the turbine of the T-80 due to its high procurement or operating costs. For example, in the 1980s, the V-46 diesel engine on the T-72 cost only 9,600 ruble, while the GTT-1000 turbine was more than 10 times more expensive at 104,000 rubles. Yet the gas turbine is not just more expensive, it also has a shorter running life and consumes more fuel. Furthermore, it is harder to maintain and repair. So in every way, it is more expensive. The gas turbine is also resource hungry when the tank is idling, which means it's more complicated to operate, which can lead to problems in tactical situations as well. During the build-up in 1994, prior to the assault on the Chechen capital of Grozny, a number of T-80B and T-80BV tanks were taken out of depots and handed over to units that had not received any training on the T-80. Unfamiliar with the voracious appetite of the T-80 turbine engine, crews left the engines running at idle, not realizing that the tank consumes as much fuel at idle as when running, thereby quickly exhausting their fuel supply. Such fuel requirements also mean that training is expensive or has to be cut down as well. The gas turbine has various benefits as well. It has no issue with cold weather, additionally it is more silent as well. But these benefits only matter in certain circumstances, for instance for the cold in the Murmansk area. This is likely the reason why Russian naval infantry, which in early 2022 had only about 10% of the active Russian tanks, yet of those 10%, 30% were T-80s. Another issue might be that the production plants for these turbines might not be operable anymore or might be producing something different. Of course, there was also a variant of the T-80 with diesel engine, most notably the T-80UD, but those were produced in Ukraine plants and while Russia lost access to those. Technically, it's possible to also use the T-72 engine in a T-80. There were projects like this, namely Object 644, but according to Zaloga, this would be time-consuming and expensive. This resource intensiveness likely is also the reason why of early 2022 Russian tanks in service only about 17% are T-80s, meanwhile T-90s account for 12.2%, while the mainstay of the Russian tank fleet was the T-72 with 70.8%. This is in stark contrast to the situation in the late 90s, according to Zaloga. Whether the T-90 was favored or not, by the late 1990s, the T-80 was the backbone of the Russian tank forces. Older tanks have been retired due to the lack of funds, and of the 5,546 tanks still in service west of the Urals in 1997, 3,210 were T-80 tanks, almost 60%. Considering how resource-intensive the gas turbine engines are, this begs the question how Russia could afford this, and/or if many of those existing gas turbine engines in that period were used up and not replaced. This would also explain why in 2022 around 3,000 T-80s are noted as to be in storage, while only 580 were active. Of course, another question is why use the T-80 in the first place? Its gun is the same as that of the T-64, T-72 or T-90. T-80 has better mobility, but as mentioned, it is more expensive. According to a Ukrainian tanker that was interviewed a while ago, a T-80 variant is the best protected. The most well-protected tank of the enemy is the T-80 BVM, after that the T-90A and modifications of the T-72B. You can check out the video here, yet the question is, in what situation does this really make a difference and how significant is it? Since in most situations the T-80 is as good or bad as a T-72 or T-90, assuming that the sensory equipment is the same. One could argue that in most situations it is even as good or bad as the T-62. A T-80 might kill enemy infantry or lightly armored vehicle faster than a T-62 due to better fire control systems. Yet in overall, a T-62 can do the job as well. Similarly, against latest modern anti-tank guided missiles, the T-80 will likely not do much better than a T-62, yet the T-80 is far more expensive to run and maintain. Don't get me wrong, the T-80 is clearly better. The question is in how many situations in the current Ukraine war it makes really a difference. Currently in Ukraine, likely one of the most important systems for tanks is the sensory equipment, mainly thermal imaging devices. Those can be installed on any tank. As such, it would make more sense to invest money and time into thermal images than into gas turbine engines. And of course, it would be in the best interest to have a tank equipped with thermal imagers to have as little downtime as possible, yet gas turbines are high maintenance. To conclude, the large number of T-80s in storage likely won't change very much. The T-80 with the gas turbine engine is really expensive to maintain, repair and operate. On the current battlefield, the gas turbine likely is not worth the trade-off. The lower noise might help in certain situations, yet it is doubtful that it is worth the price. In some situations it might help, but it is significantly more expensive. And the downtime for maintenance is also higher, thus the tank have less operational time while also requiring a specialized repair crew. The higher reverse speed of the T-80 is also worth noting, yet again the question remains how important that is in the bigger picture. As a Ukrainian tanker noted in an interview, there are circumstances where our T-64s are better than captured T-80 BVMs or T-72Bs, and also vice versa. As such, it is likely more cost-effective to restore the various T-72s and T-62s in storage than getting T-80s back on track with the high-maintenance gas turbine engines. Similarly, installing T-72 engines into the T-80 would also create just additional overhead while bringing little to no benefit in the long run. While looking at the various numbers for the T-80s, I stumbled upon an interesting discrepancy, namely that about 2,000 T-80 tanks seem to be unaccounted for. According to Russian sources, the Soviet Union built 7,066 from 1976 to 1990, whereas Zaloga notes 7,111, based on the latest Russian publications. Although be aware that in the Treaty on Conventional Armed Forces in Europe, signed in November 1990, a far lower number was given by the Russians. Total T-80 production was probably more than the 4,874 tanks reported under the CFE treaty as none were listed in the Ukraine, even though about 320 were at the Kharkov plant. And there were probably some T-80s at the Omsk plant as well. Meanwhile, the numbers from Andrei Tarasenko added up to account for 6,234, according to Tech Error. Furthermore, in an email exchange, Stephen Zaloga noted that the number only accounts for the Soviet Union. There might have been a few more produced later, but it is hard to tell. Meanwhile, someone else noted that this number could have been inflated as well due to corruption and meeting production quotas. So this raises already a major eyebrow, since one of those numbers is clearly wrong, since the difference between produced numbers and reporters' numbers for the treaty is 2,237 tanks. And keep in mind, this was the best Soviet tank. It is highly unlikely that the Soviet Union lost more than 2,000 tanks from 1976 to 1990, since the T-80 was not used in any war the Soviet Union participated in. For instance, in Afghanistan, other tanks were used. And to put that number in contrast, according to Oryx, the Russian forces have so far lost about 1,460 tanks in Ukraine, yet that accounts for all types. Be aware, lost kill claims are always just a guideline. I did many videos on this before. Anyway, the point is, losing about 2,000 tanks in non-combat situations, particularly the best one in the armed forces, is basically a bit odd. So I contacted several people about this. Basically, there are two kinds of explanations, which I think are not necessarily mutually exclusive. One side thinks that the Russian production numbers are just overstated. This is particularly interesting since English Wikipedia notes just 4,500 plus T-80 produced, while Russian Wikipedia now lists more than 10,000 T-80s built, although this might include post-Cold War tanks as well. Yet according to Zaloga, the total number should be about 7,600 T-80s from 1976 to 1996. The other explanation is from Steven Zaloga. He noted that the CEFE treaty only counted tanks west of the Urals. Additionally, the counting rules might not require tanks that were still in plants. For instance, he notes that no T-80 UD were shown in the tables, likely since they are still in the Kharkov plant. Furthermore, the Omsk plant in Siberia is located east of the Urals. He also noted that US officials suspected that the Russians might deliberately have moved a larger number of their modern tanks like the T-80 east of the Urals as well. Well, I guess this is something for the future. Thanks to the Panzer Museum and thank you for watching. See you next time.